Hi, my name is Melody Song, and I'm the Director of Partnerships with the Resource Alliance. We're the organizer of the annual International Fundraising Congress in the Netherlands and a community of over 1,000 nonprofit organizations from over 60 countries. I was born and raised in Beijing, but I spent the last 25 years in Canada. I now live in Berlin with a small but very multicultural family. Today, I'm going to talk to you about donors from Asia. Who are they? And what to look out for in terms of cultural differences and behaviors. I also want to point out that even in North America, donor demographic had changed dramatically, reflecting a more diverse population. Although we're talking about cross-border, I have to point out that this topic of cultural awareness is very relevant to fundraising from the diaspora communities within the borders as well. I'll give you some examples of that. In general, I suggest the following strategy to foster inclusion in philanthropy. First, be aware of our differences. Internalize the value and believe in diversity. Gradually implement measures that check on inclusivity. Ask questions to identify common beliefs and values among people of each cultural background. And most importantly, get involved and interact with people of each culture. There's no doubt that wealth center is shifting east. According to Wealth Act's 2021 report on the ultra-high net worth, Asia has taken over Europe as the second wealthiest region in the world, for the second consecutive year, while mainland China continues to cement the second place position after the US to be the second wealthiest country. But when we talk about Asia as a region, it is multicultural and diverse. One of my pet peeves is to see charities or even diversity inclusion professionals putting everyone from Asia into one group and assume the same characteristics. Most Asian subcultures are drastically different. Most of you may recognize this book popularized by the movie, Crazy Rich Asians. For me, the book is just as novel as it is to you, because I grew up in the 80s in the communist northern China and had a complete different cultural experience than the characters in the book. An example is that when I worked for an international health organization, most of our Canadian donors were Chinese immigrants. But I noticed that there's a big difference between old and new immigrants from Hong Kong and from mainland China when it comes to value consciousness. One major donor, originally from Hong Kong, once explicitly told me to take the subway on a visit to him to save money. These older immigrants from Hong Kong are very conscious about how the money is spent and making sure that they're spent on the cost. They would rather talk to you over dim sum, a typical tea time tradition, cheap but delicious, than a private banquet dinner, more of a norm amongst newly arrived mainlanders. And these are just differences of subcultures within the Chinese culture. Not to mention, we also have wealthy culture centers like Japan and South Korea, whose languages and cultures are completely distinct. The point is, be very careful not to lump Asian cultures together. Never make any decision based on assumptions and have country-specific strategies. Here's another example. A large health organization in Vancouver created a direct mail campaign in Chinese and sent to households, Canadian Chinese households. However, they later found out that these households, though with seemingly Chinese names, were largely second-generation Chinese who didn't read Chinese. The campaign backfired badly. It was shocking to me that how charities in Greater Vancouver, the most Asian city outside of Asia, with 40% of Asian population and 20% of Chinese population amongst its richest, were ignorant of the generation history and nuances among these potential donors. To that point, I will now talk more about Chinese culture, one that I'm most familiar with, and philanthropy in mainland China. According to Hofstede's cultural dimension theory, here is China in comparison with the United Kingdom in power distance, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty avoidance, long-term orientation, and indulgence. I found this very insightful when we deal with people from different cultures to look at these values first. I also personally like some graphic comparison by a Chinese-German graphic designer, with China being the red and Germany being the blue. The first one is about relationships. As you can see, Chinese relationship networks are more interconnected and complex. Who you know is extremely important in building trust. This one is about problem-solving approach. The Chinese culture thrives on ambiguity. It's fair to say that dealing with Chinese donors, you should never take yes as a yes and a no as a no. Chinese culture has a large power distance, which means the respect for the person in charge is very important. Last but not least, Chinese party is a circle, which usually represents a banquet table. The culture's entire social norm is centered around food, and it's very important to appreciate and accept what's offered to you and participate not in one-on-one, but a round-table fashion. Let's now turn our attention to giving in China and how it can be relevant to you. Giving is on the rise in the past decade, and top causes include education, poverty alleviation, and arts and culture. But after the pandemic, health and environment are also becoming popular causes. However, would donors give to causes outside of China? In fact, research and my personal experience all show that Chinese philanthropists aspire to make an international impact and therefore are looking abroad to increase their global reach. The Chinese government supports its approach as it pushes for China to take a greater role in the international arena. An example of this is the real estate tycoon couple, Zhang Xin and Pan Shiyi of Soho Group, that donated $15 million and $10 million to Harvard and Yale, respectively, providing support for Chinese undergraduates to study abroad. While many criticized them for donating to foreign institutions, the move reflected their willingness to look beyond China to cultivate the next generation of leaders. Since 2018, they have said that they are scanning several other prospective partners schools to expand their scholarship program. Another philanthropist I met during a conservation project gave extensively to the studies of salmon reintroduction and relocation program in British Columbia. This is because this research program can inform other similar situations. In this case, the research can help China bring back salmon into a major river up north where they were extinct. They're also giving a significant amount of money due to personal connection, as most have different passport because education for their children and flexibility of travel. In fact, the US, the UK are the top 2 countries for Chinese high net worth individuals, followed by Canada and Australia. So using the Soho couple as an example, let's look at the demographic of the Chinese high net worth. So they're mostly self-made millionaires or billionaires in their 20s in the 1980s. So it's a critical date as wealth were made largely during and right after China's transition into the market economy. So that would put them between 45 to 65 years of age. They have children in the last years of K to 12, or starting or already going into higher education. So giving may be more now towards higher education as children grow up. And they most likely have foreign passports, and their family may live outside of China because of children's education. Many are in name immigrants, but the family that live outside of China usually consists of only the mother and the children. The main income earners, mostly male or the dads, live in China and only visits during holidays. To cultivate these families, you will definitely have to make trips to China. As their children grow up, the moms often lead very isolated lives. We really appreciate the opportunity to participate in local communities. But there's always a language barrier. So being aware of that and creating opportunity for them to participate and be patient and interact is the key. My last case example is the project that I was directly involved in, which is to help the Calgary Zoo getting the giant pandas and raise the hefty $1 million per year wildlife reserve funding required. The president of the zoo and I had traveled to China every year leading up to the pandas' arrival with the goals to fundraise from government, individual, and corporations. In the end, we have raised $750,000 from 3 individual donors and the local Chinese consulate, which is the most pricing gift. We also raised a sponsorship over $1 million to transport bamboo from China from Hainan Airline and a community-based conservation project with a Chinese entrepreneur in Sichuan, helping senior community in bamboo forests to sustainably harvest bamboo for pandas while raising quality of life in the community. Our many trips to China and strategic partnership with private education institutions and government really paid off in the end. So what can you start doing tomorrow if you are interested to fundraise from new markets like China? First, reevaluate your Asian stakeholders, students, parents, or alumni, and see if your cause align with some of their values. Many wants to give causes not necessarily in China, but related. For example, scholarship to Chinese students, conservation research projects that I mentioned before, could also benefit environment in China. And the top 2 areas Chinese donors will consider are definitely education and now environment. Second is to hire people with diversity. This is not easy. As we know, talent, especially colored talent in fundraising, is very hard to come by. But if we all try our best, our profession will finally reflect the population we serve. And last but not the least, get help from experts and people like the Resource Alliance and the people that we work with in the region to help you and advise you. So my last piece of advice is that international fundraising is hard, but when done right, it can also be fun and an undeniable, enriching experience. Thank you.